This is Renting Smart, the South African residential rental podcast, bringing common sense to rentals with your host, certified residential sales and letting specialist, Grant Rea. Welcome back to another episode of Renting Smart. My name is Grant Rea. I'm a certified residential sales and letting specialist. I'm otherwise known as Go to Grant, and you can find me at Remax Living in the City Bowl of Cape Town. A interesting show today about what on earth is happening in the rental market in Cape Town. And you don't need to look far to find a landlord who's currently sitting with a vacant property. Joining me on the show is Claudie Devine, my personal assistant and highly esteemed property manager, who is my right-hand person, and she is the go-to for all things admin. So, Claudie, welcome.
Thank you, Grant. Great to be back. Looking forward to this show.
This show is to just help folks understand why we're in the market that we find ourselves in and why we have such a massive supply and demand imbalance. And we were already experiencing somewhat of a downturn from the second quarter in 2019. And there were a couple of factors that were influencing where we were going in the market.
Yes, quite a few indeed. I mean, there was a change in the number of people moving to Cape Town. There was a change in people wanting to move out of the city in terms of more working from home. There was a decrease in Airbnb. There's a long list of changes that basically meant last year we started with not having rental increases. And that meant that properties were also starting to go down already before we had COVID-19.
Now, let's get back to some of the reasons as to why the rental market has changed. One of the biggest influences in the rental market for long-term landlords, and this may be a surprise, is the Airbnb phenomenon. And as much as I am all for disruption, Airbnb has influenced the rental market in so many ways.
It has. It's a huge factor now because Airbnb properties that were renovated to a very high standard and furnished are now suddenly not able to be filled, and the market is flooded with them.
Yes, so folks whose Airbnb bookings basically fell flat on their face, all their prospects and all their plans for future income, particularly over the very lucrative season in Cape Town, basically got ripped out of under them.
Yes, and now those landlords are wanting a long-term tenant.
Yeah, so now we've got a massive abundance of properties and an ever-dwindling number of tenants looking, because now we don't have the tenants who have possibly moved to Cape Town to come and study English for a year. Those have disappeared. You've got fewer folks in Cape Town for the purposes of the film industry. You've got fewer folks being transferred to Cape Town for job opportunities. And just the way people are migrating, even before COVID-19, was changing.
It was, because I'd just like to say back in the day, we used to have a queue of tenants wanting to look.
We hardly ever showed a rental property more than one time because there was a massive imbalance in supply and demand. There was almost no supply and a massive demand. So 100 tenants were vying for 10 properties.
Yes, and now we have even worse than the reverse of that.
The reverse even exponentially so.
Very much so. And worse because of what's happened with leases and the regulations affecting movement around leases and leases ending. So I have found that basically from March, April and May, where tenants were meant to have ended their leases and were probably hoping to find a new place or a different place to stay, they've all just moved onto a month-to-month basis.
So that's created an interesting scenario in our business.
It's actually the first time that we've experienced this because there's no pressure to actually move out of your property. So people are not looking for a property, say, I must move by the 1st of July and I want to find a new property, and then they commit to moving somewhere by the 1st of July. They absolutely have to move. But there's no absolutely have to moves at the moment, none whatsoever. And I have found landlords really valuing tenants right now when they suddenly realize their tenant wants to move on, and because there's such bargains to be had at this stage, they're prepared to drop the rent even further so that they can rather not stand empty.
So the landlord that's going to survive this kind of market is the one who's able to be flexible, who understands the dynamics at play in the marketplace, and who values his good tenant who is in the property right now, who cares for the property and who pays on time. So on more than one instance, we've had landlords match the proposed rental that the tenant was going to move on for, these greener pastures, the landlord would match that rental.
Yes, I think landlords are doing everything they can to keep their tenants because it really is a better option to lower the rental and keep your current tenants. It really is the better option. And it's now that leaves tenants who have had to move as a result of a decrease in their financial situation, basically looking and browsing, but wanting to get something extremely good value at very little rental.
So we're going to talk in a moment about what landlords can do in this crazy market when they face the inevitable scenario of being vacant. We're going to talk about how they can get in front of the biggest possible audience and how to get success in finding a good quality tenant, even in this crazy market.
Well, even in this crazy market, there is things that they can do. First of all, advertising needs to be really broad. I think private landlords are going to struggle to advertise their properties just via social media or family and friends. You actually have to have extensive and proper professional advertising right now. And then the older properties really do need to come up to scratch. So the older properties where you maybe haven't renovated for at least 4 or 5 years and you're now competing with these very slick and fancy Airbnb properties, those are the ones that are sort of falling by the wayside. So you need to take a month to get your property up to scratch.
So it may be counterproductive, though, to talk about spending more money when you've already faced the downturn in the market. But it may actually be a good time while your property is empty to tackle those renovations so that you can get yourself ahead of the rabble, so that you can appear to be offering the best possible value to a tenant so you can secure the tenant ASAP.
Yes, and then you do need to be flexible on your rental when you start to get feedback from the market. So as much as landlords have specific costs that they need to cover, and then they want to maybe make something on top of that, this isn't really the time to be making a fortune on your property investment.
It's really a time to minimize losses and minimize a potential bleed in your perceived income of a property. Just by way of example, at my last check, we had almost 900 one-bedrooms to rent in the City Bowl, Greenpoint, Sea Point. It's around 16.2 square kilometers. It's an immense amount of choice. Now, what happens when you offer tenants not only a huge amount of choice, a huge amount of selection, a huge cross-section of finishes? Naturally, you're going to have an environment where folks are just browsing.
Yes, it's actually the worst environment for landlords. It's really terrible because tenants are basically not committing. They don't need to. They're not in a rush. They're on a month-to-month. And
rightly so.
Yeah, fair enough. Yes, definitely.
So as a landlord, it would be greatly advised, if you are going to use an agent, to consider an agent who has an exceptionally wide online reach, as well as a great reach or influence on social media.
Yes, a really good agent is important at this stage because right now, where we used to have tenants coming to us to look at properties, we're now having to take tenants one by one individually to look at all the properties we have available in their price range.
From showing a property once or twice and securing a lease to showing 10, 12, 15 tenants and potentially having no application.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. And tenants are not saying that they don't like the property. So this is the thing, landlords mustn't be offended. They're not saying they don't like the property. They're just saying, oh, we would just like to see what else there is, because they have this opportunity now.
What we've noticed in particular is if we know that we've got a property that has 50 similar properties as competition. In other words, it's a one-bedroom apartment and its 50 counterparts or competition are priced at 9,000 Rand a month. It does not benefit a landlord to price it the same. The only benefit will come is if you position yourself ahead of those as greater value.
Yes, so what we're seeing now, especially with the smaller one-bedrooms and studios, where you were getting 7.5, you're really having to drop down to 6.5 and 6. And this is something where landlords really would prefer to have 8 or 8.5 for these tiny little places. But that's just not a possibility in this rental market. And your property will stand empty if you don't face the reality of what we're having to deal with right now.
We're almost having to dispense with all our preconceived ideas of the value, the rental value of a property. I mean, there were times where Cape Town had a specific rental to value ratio, or the kind of return or gross yield that you could expect on a property being around 6% per annum. We've dwindled way below 4 and around the 3% mark. And for many landlords who are geared to the maximum and have finance at the very high point of purchasing between 2015 and 2018, those folks who have tremendous obligations in terms of bank finance on the property may want to consider offloading those kind of properties, because it may be quite a time before we recover enough to have that kind of investment make sense.
Yes, I think landlords really need to look at their finances very seriously and be realistic. I mean, those pie in the sky prices from 2-3 years ago are just not there anymore.
It may be worth chatting to your agent to just establish what a realistic actual value of your property is in relation to what kind of return you can get right now. If you can weather the storm and you have at least 20% or more equity in your property, I believe it may be worth hanging on for. But if the sums just don't work and the property is going to be draining out of your savings or out of any other source that you may not have wanted to touch right now, it may be worth considering a sale.
Yes, definitely. I think each situation has to be looked at individually, because each situation is very different. But I think that, this is a hard time for landlords. They have to get really real, and they have to also trust rental agents that are experts in this field at the moment, because I don't think that they can do it on their own. It's just a time that we've never seen before, and I've never experienced this roll on of tenants from month to month, just searching and browsing.
I mean, we're seeing tenants coming to viewings of multiple properties of ours, offered all across the board, all across the city. I mean, they'll be looking at an apartment today and a house tomorrow. So there seems to be a lot of confusion. And I mean, we've had folks say, "Oh, I'm sorry, which property was that again?" Because there's just so many to choose from.
Yeah, absolutely spoiled for choice. So pleased that they're getting the good end of the stick now, but a very tough time for landlords.
Certainly almost Christmas time for renters, and it is specifically a renter's market. So any other tips for landlords right now? We've mentioned keep a good tenant, even if the rent reduces. We've talked about getting in front of a really wide audience. What about things like video? We seem to be having great success with video.
Video is a fantastic way to promote your property. It actually is the quickest way to get someone to see what your property looks like and what it's all about. So a video is very important. And also in terms of COVID-19 having less access and reducing exposure is also something that has to be taken into consideration. Tenants love videos. It's nicer for them to see the video and also to understand that as a professional rental agent, this is something you're taking very seriously. They really appreciate how much effort you put into putting a video together for them, because it also saves them time. They'd rather see 5 or 6 videos as opposed to trying to get to 5 or 6 different properties.
And it also eliminates the time wasters, because let's say they were fixated on a particular type of finish of a property. You might not be able to spot that from just photographs or a normal listing. But once they've seen the video, they can say, actually, that doesn't work for us. Saves us time, saves you time as a landlord if you had to put those videos out. And getting videos out like that on social media platforms can elicit more interest than just a link to an ad. Folks are getting quite lazy to click on a link. So post that video directly in your social media pages. And if someone wants some more information, you can get that through to them.
And those videos don't have to be long either. They actually only have to be 1 or 2 minutes. So it doesn't have to be an extensive video.
Because let's be honest, everyone's attention span is getting shorter and shorter.
Yes, so a short video that does show the property at its best is definitely the best way to go.
Now, we as agents obviously would prefer to convey to a landlord to use an agent. But if I was a landlord, I'm struggling to fill my property. I've always traditionally filled it myself. It was easy. Now I'm struggling. What questions do I ask a rental agent?
There is a difference between a very good qualified rental agent and someone who just hasn't been in the business for that long. There is a massive difference. And there's a massive difference in terms of processes and procedures. And what we spoke about earlier in terms of the videos, that is something that sets a good rental agent apart completely.
And your agent, naturally, the good agent would be experienced, has a great track record, has great reviews online on their various social media pages or their own website, and of course can expose your property to a significantly wide audience. It surprises me constantly how landlords do not interview rental agents. They will simply appoint multiple rental agents, it's almost like just throwing spaghetti up at the ceiling and hope that something sticks.
Yes, you obviously want to have a agent where their clients have been with them for a year in and year out. That's always the test of time. And obviously, if you're dealing with an agent that has had a client for at least 5 or more years, you know they're able to weather the storm of the different changes in the market. And we're able to help those kind of clients now where it's difficult times. We're still able to assist them.
Well, very interesting show. And if you're an unfortunate landlord facing vacancies right now, feel free to give us a call. Even if you don't use our services, get in touch with us. I hope you can share this podcast with someone who may benefit from it. We are finding ourselves in very, very interesting times. And you are free to post your questions and queries on the Renting Smart Facebook page, and we'll try and cover those subjects in the weeks to come. Thank you to my co-host, Claudie.
Thank you, Grant, and good luck to all our landlords out there.
You've been listening to Renting Smart, the South African residential rental podcast. Find us on Facebook under Renting Smart, and we hope to catch you on the next show.